We need to finish the divorce now, so you can go live with your lover and be a free woman, but no, you won't be entitled to anything." The words echoed around the room like thunder, freezing her face in a mix of shock and panic. I had rehearsed that moment countless times in my head, but nothing prepared me for the expression I saw on her face at that moment. That woman, who for so many years shared my dreams, my fears, and my life, was now there, stripped of any mask, staring at me as if I had just been exposed to the world. The silence between us lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, she opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. His rapid breathing, shaking hands and desperate look said more than any excuse he could come up with. "You can't do this to me," she finally managed to say, her voice breaking. "I can't," I replied, keeping my tone firm. "I already did." She swallowed, and I felt the weight of each word as she continued. "You made your choice when you decided to throw away everything we built together. Now, it's time to face the consequences." She collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands, but I didn't feel sorry. I felt angry. I felt pain. And most of all, I felt like I was finally in control. But that wasn't the end. It couldn't be. Because, deep down, I knew that this betrayal went beyond a simple affair. There was more. Much more. For weeks, I felt like something was wrong. The strange hours. Messages deleted from the cell phone. The smell of a perfume that wasn't mine. It all accumulated until I could no longer ignore it. I hired a private investigator to be sure. Deep down, I still wanted to be wrong. I wanted to discover that it was all just paranoia. But the photos I received left no room for doubt. There she was, in an expensive restaurant, laughing and touching the hand of a man I had never seen before. I should have confronted her at that moment, but I couldn't. I needed time. I needed to plan. And, above all, he needed to ensure that she would not escape this situation unscathed. In the days that followed, I pretended not to know anything. I kept smiling, kissing her in the morning, asking about her day like everything was normal. And every answer she gave me, every lie that came out of her mouth, made me feel like I was drowning. But today was different. Today, I wasn't going to drown anymore. I was going to pull her into the same darkness she threw me into. "I just want you to listen to me," she begged, trying to get up, but I raised my hand to stop her. "Listen to you? For what? To tell me it was a mistake? That you were confused? That it meant nothing?" She was silent. "Because if you say any of those things, I will laugh in your face. I saw you together. I know everything. So please spare us the spectacle." She fell to her knees, holding my hands. "I didn't want to hurt you, but it hurt." She was crying, but I felt nothing but emptiness. It was then that I decided to open the dresser drawer and threw the documents that were already prepared in front of it. "Sign." She looked at the papers as if they were a death sentence. "What if I don't sign?" he challenged, in a last act of resistance. "So I make a point of dragging this to court. And then, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly why we're here. Want your family to know? Your friends? Do you want your dear lover to discover the kind of woman you really are?" She collapsed, clutching the pen with trembling fingers. But there was something in her eyes. Something that didn't just feel like guilt. It felt like fear. And I knew that that fear didn't just come from what I was doing. It came from something deeper. Something she was hiding. It was at that moment that I realized that this betrayal went far beyond what I had imagined. And as she signed the papers, I knew there were still secrets to be revealed. Secrets that could destroy everything. I just wasn't prepared for what came next. And much less the impact it would have on our lives. Welcome to the channel where the truth about cheating is exposed bluntly. Here, we never support or romanticize infidelity. Our stories are fictional, but they carry real lessons about how betrayal can devastate lives, hearts and homes. Get ready to dive into an intense and shocking narrative. Take a deep breath, because this story will move you. Happy listening. Daniel and Laura were the couple that everyone admired. When they entered a room, they seemed to carry an aura of perfection, he, always impeccable in tailored suits and confident posture, and she, with her charming smile and delicate gestures, as if she had come straight from a fairy tale. They met in college during a fundraising event, and from then on, the connection was instant. Friends commented on how they seemed made for each other, and over time, their relationship became an example of what many wished they had. After 7 years of marriage, their lives seemed to have reached the perfect balance. They lived in a spacious house, with large windows that allowed sunlight to enter, creating a welcoming and lively environment. Laura's carefully chosen decor displayed a touch of modern elegance mixed with sentimental memories, travel photos, scented candles and paintings that showed how much they valued the story they were building together. Daniel has always been a determined man, one of those who spare no effort to achieve his goals. Coming from a humble family, he worked hard to earn his place in the corporate world. Now he held a position of high responsibility in a large company and was known for his impeccable ethics and strategic vision. However, professional success took its toll. Long hours at the office, endless meetings and frequent business trips began to take him away from home life little by little. Laura, on the other hand, had put her career aside to focus on her marriage. She had studied interior design, but after getting married, she decided to only work on smaller projects, allowing herself time to take care of the house and support Daniel. She always liked to be seen as the perfect wife, the woman who kept everything under control, from dinner ready on time to the smallest details of the parties they organized for friends and family. However, behind that welcoming smile, there was a woman who, at times, felt invisible. Their routine, despite apparently being harmonious, hid small gaps. Daniel arrived late and was often too exhausted for long conversations or moments of affection. Laura tried to fill in the gaps by planning surprises and trips to rekindle the relationship, but she often felt that her efforts were met with superficial enthusiasm. He was there physically, but his mind seemed distant, always busy with the next big project or problem at work. Still, they continued to follow the perfect script. Formal dinners, smiling photos for social media and expensive gifts on commemorative dates. It was as if they both knew the role they were supposed to play and tried hard to maintain it, even when the real emotion began to fade. Among her closest friends, Laura was seen as someone accomplished and admired by everyone. Her social skills were impeccable, and she knew how to make people feel special. However, on lonely nights, when Daniel was stuck at work or traveling, she would find herself looking at the decorated walls and feeling an inexplicable emptiness. Daniel, in turn, struggled with pressures at work and the desire to continue being the exemplary provider. As much as he loved Laura, he often wondered if he could be the husband she deserved. In moments of reflection, he felt guilty for not being present anymore, but he always promised himself that he would make up for it in the future, a future that, somehow, never arrived. Weekends were the time they tried to reconnect. Laura prepared romantic dinners, and Daniel made an effort to get off his cell phone and pay attention to her. There were laughs, stories about the past and small gestures of affection that seemed to rekindle the passion, but these moments were short-lived. On Monday, everything returned to normal, and the cycle began again. Despite appearances, their relationship wasn't falling apart. On the contrary, it seemed strong enough to withstand the challenges. Laura still felt her heart race when Daniel pulled her into an unexpected kiss, and he still looked at her as if she were the most beautiful woman in the world. However, what they both did not admit, not even to themselves, was that something had changed. Small cracks were beginning to appear in the solid foundation they had built. Friendships were also part of this balance. They were close to other couples, and regular meetings served as an outlet. Laura loved these meetings, especially because it was an opportunity to break out of her routine and receive compliments about her home and style. Daniel, on the other hand, used to be more reserved, preferring to talk about business or sports rather than opening up about his personal life. Between laughter and glasses of wine, there were subtle comments that went unnoticed by most, but that Laura absorbed as small blows. Jokes about absent husbands or wives who only knew how to spend money rang in his mind longer than they should have. And when everyone left, she was alone, arranging the dishes and thinking about whether she was living the life she really wanted. Daniel also had his own insecurities. Despite his professional success, he sometimes wondered if Laura still saw him as the same man she fell in love with years ago. He saw the looks in her eyes when they were at social events, as if she was looking for something beyond what he could offer. And although he tried to ignore these thoughts, they haunted him during sleepless nights at the hotel when he was traveling for work. The tension between them was not explicit. It was like a careful dance, in which they both knew the steps but avoided playing certain notes. Perhaps for fear of ruining the harmony that others so admired. Until something started to change. Small differences in Laura's expressions. Daniel's evasive answers. Prolonged silences replaced previously spontaneous conversations. That house, which once seemed like a refuge of love and stability, started to seem too big. And although they both tried hard to keep up appearances, it was impossible to ignore that something was pulling them apart, slowly but steadily. Even so, neither Daniel nor Laura were prepared for the impact that the upcoming revelations would have on their lives. Because, even when everything seems to be under control, the truth always finds a way to surface. Laura woke up that morning with an inexplicable weight on her chest. The rays of sunlight that came through the window seemed colder than usual, and the house, despite being silent, carried a strange echo. She reached over to the empty side of the bed and touched the still cold sheets. Daniel had left early again. It was the third week in a row that he had left before she woke up, leaving only a hurried note on the kitchen table. She went downstairs and found the folded piece of paper next to the coffee maker. Important meeting. I'll be back late. I love you. The words were there, but Laura felt as if they no longer had any weight. She looked at her empty cup and wondered when exactly that lonely feeling had started. Maybe months ago. Maybe years. It was difficult to say. He spent the morning organizing the house, trying to distract his thoughts. Every corner seemed to tell a different story, memories of laughter, romantic dinners and nights in front of the fireplace. But now everything seemed distant. As if I were living in an old photograph, in which the colors had begun to fade. That afternoon, he decided to visit his best friend, Helena. I needed to vent, even though I didn't know exactly how to put what I felt into words. As I drove, I mentally replayed the last few months, looking for clues, something that would explain that feeling of emptiness. When she arrived, Helena was already waiting with a glass of wine in her hand. They sat on the porch, and Laura finally blurted out the words that bothered her. Have you ever felt like you're losing someone, but you don't know why? Helena frowned. Do you think Daniel is hiding something? Laura hesitated. I didn't want to believe it. Daniel has always been a man of integrity. But something inside her screamed that something was wrong. I don't know. He's been so distant lately. And I keep trying to find reasons for this, but all I can think is that maybe it's my fault. Don't say that. Helena interrupted. You are an incredible woman. If he's distant, that's his problem, not yours. The words offered some comfort, but not enough to silence the doubts. That night, Daniel returned late, as promised. Laura was in the living room, waiting for him. When the door opened, she looked up immediately. He looked tired, but there was something more. Something different in the way he avoided her gaze. How was the meeting? Tiring. Lots of decisions to make. Laura tried to smile, but she felt tension in the air. He placed the folder on the table and walked over to the couch, sitting down next to her. Are you well? He asked. I am. The short answer seemed to close the matter. But inside, Laura felt like she was on the edge of a precipice. She wanted to ask more. I wanted to confront him. But something stopped her. Maybe the fear of hearing something I wasn't prepared to deal with. In the following days, Laura began to observe Daniel more closely. You noticed the little details, the messages he quickly deleted, the calls he took in another room, the schedules that didn't seem to make sense. She tried to ignore it, tried to trust him, but the doubts started to grow like weeds. It was then that he decided to do something he never imagined he could do. On Friday night, while Daniel was taking a shower, Laura took his cell phone. Her hands were shaking, but she knew she needed to look. I needed to be sure. He unlocked the device and went straight to the messages. At first, everything seemed normal. Work conversations, quick messages to friends. But then he found a name he didn't recognize. Sophia. There were dozens of messages. Some short, some long. She opened one of them and felt her stomach drop. I can't wait to meet you again. You make me feel alive. Laura had to sit down. The words seemed to dance on the screen, mocking her. She continued reading, gliding through the conversation. Messages full of intimacy, shared secrets, promises. When Daniel came out of the bathroom, he found Laura sitting on the floor, holding her cell phone. He stopped in the middle of the hallway, his face pale. What are you doing with my phone? She looked up. There were no tears, just a biting coldness. Who is Sophia? The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel took a step forward, but Laura raised her hand. No. Stay where you are. He tried to speak, but she interrupted him. I read everything. Every message. So please spare me the excuses. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment and then opened them again, as if trying to find the right words. It's not what you think. Laura laughed, but the sound came out bitter. Isn't that what I think? I saw the messages. I read every word. How can you say it's not what I think? Daniel ran his hand through his hair, visibly nervous. I can explain. I don't want explanations. Laura screamed, finally allowing the tears to fall. Silence once again filled the environment. Daniel stood there, looking defeated, as Laura collapsed to the floor. She slowly got up, picked up the divorce documents that were already prepared, and threw them on the table. Sign. Now. Daniel looked at the papers, then at Laura, and saw something in her eyes he had never seen before, determination mixed with pain. But before picking up the pen, he hesitated. There was something that hadn't been said yet. Something he knew would change everything. Laura noticed the hesitation and narrowed her eyes. What it was? Are you going to tell me any more lies? Daniel took a deep breath. It's not a lie. She crossed her arms, waiting. Then say it. But he didn't say. Not at that moment. Because, despite everything, I knew that conversation wasn't ready to end yet. Laura looked at Daniel as if he were a stranger. The pen he held hovered over the divorce papers, but he didn't sign them. The silence between the two was suffocating, filled only by the distant sound of the clock ticking down each second. She crossed her arms, trying to contain the anger and pain that pulsed inside her like a bomb about to explode. Why are you hesitating? He asked, with a trembling voice. Daniel looked up, and Laura saw something different in them. It wasn't just guilt. It was fear. Because I need to tell you something first. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. Another lie. Another pathetic excuse to justify what you did. It's not an excuse. He said, finally putting the pen on the table. It's the truth. And you deserve to know. Laura took a step back, as if she needed to protect herself from the imminent impact of those words. Then speak. Speak quickly, because I no longer have patience for your games. Daniel took a deep breath, but his hands were shaking. He looked straight at her, as if he was about to rip out a piece of himself. I knew about you and the investigator. She froze. What? I knew you were investigating me. I noticed the looks, the questions. And I knew you would find out. Laura took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. So you admitted it? You knew I would find out you were cheating on me and yet you continued? I knew, but not in the way you think. She crossed her arms, feeling her heart speed up. Not the way I think. Why is there any other explanation that makes sense? There was a reason. Reason? Laura shouted. Spare me, Daniel. Reason? What's the excuse now? Stress at work? Lack? Platonic love for another woman? What else can you come up with? Daniel slammed his hand on the table, finally letting his anger boil over. I was protecting you. The words echoed in the room, leaving Laura paralyzed. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Protecting? Protecting from what? He finally managed to ask, his voice breaking. Daniel ran his hands over his face, as if preparing for an inevitable blow. From the coup. She blinked, confused. Scam. Sophia wasn't just my lover. Laura felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The words seemed to get jumbled in his mind. Like this? What are you saying? Daniel got up and started pacing around the room, agitated. I found out. I found out that someone was trying to destroy us financially. And Sophia was part of that. Laura laughed, but it was an empty laugh. So now you want me to believe you were sleeping with her to protect us? Is this your story? Try. My God, you are unbelievable. Listen. Daniel shouted. Do you want the truth? That's the truth. She approached me months ago, she knew things about us, about our accounts, about the company. He said he could help me avoid a financial collapse. I didn't know at first, but then I realized she was part of it. Laura was silent, trying to process each word. And you kept seeing her? Yes. Because I needed to find out where this went. I needed to know who else was involved. Then why didn't you ever tell me? Because I knew you wouldn't believe it. Because I didn't know who to trust. She felt her eyes burning, but she held back the tears. So you chose to lie. You chose to deceive me. Daniel lowered his head, finally defeated. I didn't want to, but I was trying to protect what we built. Laura shook her head, taking slow steps back. You destroyed everything. Trying to protect, you destroyed. He approached, but she raised her hand, pushing him away. Don't come close to me. I can't trust you anymore. Not after this. Laura, no. He shouted. It's over, Daniel. He finished. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. He looked at her, silently begging for a chance. But she knew there was no turning back. Laura took the divorce papers and placed them in front of him again. Sign. And then leave. Daniel hesitated for a moment, but finally picked up the pen. The sound of paper being scratched seemed to echo in the room like a hammer hitting the final nail in a coffin. When he finished, he put down the pen and looked at Laura once more. I loved you, Laura. Always. She looked away, unable to respond. Daniel picked up his briefcase and walked to the door. Before leaving, he looked back, as if waiting for her to call him. But Laura remained silent, with her arms crossed and her face turned away. When the door closed, she felt the weight of the world come crashing down on her shoulders. Alone in the living room, Laura collapsed onto the sofa, allowing the tears to finally fall. The shock, the anger, the pain, it all came at once. She knew that this was just the first part of what was yet to come. Looking at the signed papers, he realized that despite the momentary relief, the true weight of the revealed secret still hung in the air. And deep down, she knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Laura sat on the sofa for a long time after the door closed. The echo of silence filled the room, suffocating it. She stared at the divorce papers on the table, as if waiting for them to come to life and explain what had just happened. But there were no answers there. Just the weight of decisions that seemed irreversible. The tears had finally dried, leaving his face marked with salt and exhaustion. Laura stood up slowly, as if her body weighed tons, and walked to the kitchen. He opened a bottle of wine, poured a full glass and drank it in one gulp. The cell phone vibrated on the counter, making her startle. When he picked up the device, he saw Helena's name flashing on the screen. "Laura? Are you well?" Her friend's voice was urgent, but Laura didn't respond immediately. He felt a lump in his throat and had to take a deep breath before answering. "I don't know, Helena. I really don't know. Do you want me to come over there?" Laura looked at the room, at the emptiness around her, and nodded, even though she knew her friend couldn't see her. "He comes." While waiting, Laura arranged the glasses on the table as if she were preparing to receive ordinary visitors. But this was no ordinary visit. Helena arrived a few minutes later, entered without knocking and, upon seeing Laura's condition, left her bag on the floor and hugged her without saying anything. He signed it. Helena pulled away a little, studying her face. "And you? Are you relieved or regretful?" Laura gave a half smile, humorless. "I don't even know what I feel anymore." "They weren't just messages, were they?" Laura shook her head. "No. It was much more than that. It was a parallel life that he maintained and that, in some way, he justified in his head." "And what are you going to do now?" Laura opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the sound of the intercom. She frowned. "Are you expecting someone?" "No." She walked to the phone and answered it. "Lady Laura? Sorry to bother you at this hour, but there is a man here who says he needs to talk to you." "What? Who is it?" He hesitated before responding. "He said his name is Ricardo." Laura felt her body go cold. She knew that name. He was the lawyer who took care of Daniel's finances. "You can send it up." Helena looked at her, confused. "Who is Ricardo?" "Someone who, apparently, has more to tell me than I expected." When the door opened, Ricardo entered with a serious expression, carrying a black folder under his arm. "Laura." She waved, pointing to the couch. "What are you doing here? Did Daniel send you?" "No. He doesn't know I came." "Then why are you here?" Ricardo placed the folder on the table and opened it, revealing a series of documents and bank statements. "Because you need to know everything before it's too late." Laura sat down, and Helena remained standing, watching. "Everything what?" Ricardo took out a piece of paper and placed it in front of her. "This is a contract signed by Daniel 6 months ago. He transferred a significant amount to a joint account he opened with Sophia. But that's not the most worrying thing." Laura looked at the document, feeling her stomach turn. "So what is it?" "This account was emptied 2 days ago. All the money was withdrawn and transferred abroad." Laura blinked, confused. "Outside? Where?" "Switzerland. And the worst part is that Daniel apparently doesn't know. Sophia disappeared with everything." The world seemed to revolve around Laura. "Are you saying he was tricked?" "Yes. And that she used their relationship to carry out the coup." Helena sat next to Laura, holding her hand. "So, everything he said about trying to protect his finances was true?" Ricardo nodded. But he trusted her too much. He let his emotions cloud his judgment. And now it's ruined. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. "Does he know that?" "Not yet." She stood up abruptly. "I need to talk to him." Laura, Helena tried to stop her. I need. She took the keys and left the house, with Helena and Ricardo close behind. The path to the temporary apartment where Daniel was staying seemed endless. When he finally arrived, he knocked loudly on the door. It took a few seconds for him to open it, and when he did, the shock on his face was evident. Laura? What are you doing here? She pushed the door and entered. Why didn't you tell me everything? He closed the door slowly, not understanding. What are you talking about? She threw the papers on the table. From that. Daniel looked at the documents and turned pale. How did you get that? Does it matter? I know everything. I know you were deceived. I know you lost everything. He sank onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. I tried to fix it. I tried to save it. Laura knelt in front of him, holding his wrists. Why didn't you tell me? I could have helped you. Because I didn't want to drag you into this. But you dragged me. One way or another, I was already involved. Daniel looked at her with teary eyes. I let you down. I screwed up. She shook her head. No. You only made mistakes. Like all of us. He touched her face, but she pulled her hands away. It doesn't change what happened between us. But I won't let you sink alone. Daniel was silent, while Laura picked up the papers again. Let's fix this. His eyes filled with hope, but Laura remained firm. But that doesn't mean we're going back. Daniel nodded, accepting the truth. I just want you to be okay. Then let's get started. She looked at the clock. There was still time. Time to start over, one way or another. Laura felt the weight of exhaustion in every muscle as she walked home that night. Daniel's apartment seemed even darker than she had imagined, as if it reflected the confusion and despair he carried inside. The words they had exchanged kept echoing in his mind. No matter how much he tried to organize his thoughts, they were mixed together in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She knew she couldn't just turn away and ignore what she had discovered. Even after everything Daniel had done, the pain of betrayal was still less overwhelming than the sight of him ruined, broken inside. There was something about him that still made her want to reach out. But pride and hurt fought to keep her at bay. Upon entering the house, she found Helena sitting on the sofa, waiting for her with an anxious look. And then? What happened? Laura dropped her bag on the floor and sat down next to her friend, feeling the weight of the day finally falling on her shoulders. He's destroyed, Helena. He lost everything. Helena frowned. And you? How are you? Laura looked at her hands, searching for an answer that made sense. I don't know. Part of me wants to help him, but another part is still screaming for everything he did. Helena held his hand. You don't have to do anything, Laura. He made his decisions. And now you have to deal with the consequences. I know that. But what? Laura looked up, and Helena saw something different there, a gleam of determination mixed with hurt. But I can't turn my back and let him sink alone. Helena sighed, shaking her head. And what are you going to do? Laura got up and started pacing back and forth. First, we need to find Sophia. She can't just disappear with everything. It must have left some trace. Helena crossed her arms, clearly uncomfortable. Do you really want to get more involved in this? What if this woman is dangerous? Have you ever thought about what might happen if she finds out you're after her? I thought. But I can't stay still. I need to do something. And Daniel? What does he think of that? Laura stopped and looked at her friend. He has no choice. Over the next few days, Laura and Daniel worked together to track Sophia's movements. The information Ricardo brought was enough to take the first step, but the clues quickly began to disappear. Laura spent sleepless nights, analyzing bank records and old emails, trying to find any flaw in Sophia's calculated steps. Daniel, on the other hand, looked like a ghost. He followed everything, but he was distant, as if he was still digesting his own fall. On a particularly tense night, Laura found him sitting on the floor of the apartment, surrounded by scattered papers. He held an old photo of the two of them, taken during a birthday trip. "Why do you still keep this?" asked Laura, trying to keep her tone neutral. Daniel looked up, and she saw the pain in them. "Because I can't forget who we were before all this." She looked away, feeling the tightness in her chest return. "That doesn't change what happened." "I know. But still, I remember." The silence between them was interrupted by Laura's phone ringing. She answered quickly, and Ricardo's voice sounded on the other end. "We have something." She bought a ticket to Buenos Aires using a card that was not cancelled. Laura felt her heart accelerate. "When?" "An hour ago. The flight leaves tomorrow afternoon." After hanging up, she told Daniel, and for the first time in days, she saw something other than despair on his face. "This is our chance." The ride to the airport the next morning was silent. Laura drove while Daniel stared out the window, as if trying to process everything that was about to happen. When they arrived, they started looking for Sophia. Each passing face made Laura's stomach turn, until they finally saw her, sitting on one of the benches near the boarding gate. She seemed calm, leafing through a magazine as if nothing had happened. But when he looked up and saw Daniel, his expression instantly changed. Laura was the first to approach. "Sophia." The woman tried to get up, but Laura held her arm. "You're not going anywhere." "Laura, I can explain." "No, you can't." Daniel joined them, and Sophia looked at him with a mix of guilt and defiance. "You tricked me. I did what I needed to do to survive. Not at my expense." Daniel shouted, attracting looks around. Laura tightened her grip on Sophia's arm. "The money. Where is it?" "It has already been transferred. There's no way to get it back." Laura felt her blood boil, but before she could respond, Daniel intervened. "Then you will tell us where." "Now." Sophia hesitated, but saw in their eyes that there was no way out. She took out her cell phone and showed the transactions. Laura took photos of the screens while Daniel called Ricardo. The tension only increased as the minutes passed. Sophia tried to explain herself, saying that she needed to get away from dangerous people, but no excuse seemed to be enough. When Ricardo finally confirmed that he would be able to trace the funds, Laura took a step back, feeling her body shudder. She looked at Daniel, who looked more relieved but still devastated. "It doesn't erase what happened." "I know." They left the airport without looking back, leaving Sophia to face the consequences alone. On the way home, Daniel tried to speak, but Laura raised her hand. "Not now." He nodded, respecting her space. The next few hours were filled with phone calls and reports. Ricardo guaranteed that there were chances of recovering at least part of the money, but it would be a long process. Laura sat on the couch and finally let the weight of the day crash down on her. Daniel approached, but kept his distance. "I know you don't trust me anymore. And I don't know if you'll ever trust me." She looked at him, and he continued. "But thank you for not leaving me alone." Laura didn't respond. He just closed his eyes, trying to imagine how it would all end. There was still no clear outcome. Just uncertainties. And for the first time, she realized that she would have to rebuild herself from scratch, with or without him. Laura was sitting on the balcony, watching the orange-tinted sky at dusk. The last few weeks had passed like a hurricane, leaving behind trails of chaos and deep scars. The process to recover the money continued, but answers came slowly. Ricardo made constant updates, always hopeful, but Laura no longer put faith in anything that depended on promises. She had learned, the hard way, not to trust so easily. The silence around her felt welcoming, different from the emptiness she had felt before. For the first time, loneliness didn't scare her. She looked at the cell phone next to her and, after hesitating for a moment, picked it up. There were unread messages from Daniel. He tried to remain present, even though she made it clear that there was no longer room for them as a couple. In the first days after the confrontation with Sophia, Daniel seemed willing to fight to win Laura back. He sent flowers, called every night and apologized, as if words could undo the damage caused. But Laura knew it was too late. Something inside her had broken, and even if she tried to put the pieces back together, the cracks would still be visible. She remembered the look on his face at the airport, after everything was revealed. It was the look of someone who knew he had lost not only his money, but also the respect and love of those who mattered most. Since then, he seemed to walk like a defeated man, carrying the weight of the choices he made on his shoulders. Laura knew that Daniel was trying to get back on his feet. He returned to work but was removed from his leadership role, losing the influence he once held so proudly. The colleagues who previously admired him now looked at him with suspicion, and the rumor of the coup involving Sophia spread through the company's corridors like wildfire. He came to her several times, saying he needed to talk. He insisted he still loved her and would do anything to make up for his mistakes. But Laura could no longer hear those words. To her, empty promises had become as irrelevant as the divorce papers that now sat in a drawer. The official end of the marriage came without ceremonies, just signatures and stamps. Daniel accepted all the conditions imposed by Laura. He lost his house, gave up part of his remaining assets and left with what little was left. But he didn't disappear. He continued sending messages and sometimes left flowers on her doorstep. Laura didn't throw the flowers away, but she didn't put them in vases either. "I just left them there until they withered, as a reminder that everything one day loses its shine." Sophia, on the other hand, was finally found and arrested while trying to withdraw money in another country. The police detained her at the airport and initiated legal proceedings. But even with his arrest, part of the money was never recovered. She refused to cooperate, maintaining silence and a defiant look, as if she still believed she could get away with it. Daniel was in charge of dealing with legal issues related to Sophia, but Laura kept her distance. For her, that was no longer part of her life. In the following months, Laura began to rebuild herself. He took on new projects as a designer, resuming the career he had put aside for so long. She met new people, made friends and, little by little, learned to allow herself to be happy alone. It was during one of these projects that he met Marcos, a businessman who hired his services to renovate the company's office. He was different from Daniel. Lighter, more attentive. He didn't make grandiose promises, but he showed care in small details. They started as co-workers, then friends, until the friendship turned into something more. Marcos made her laugh again, something Laura had thought impossible months before. But she was in no hurry. He allowed himself to feel each moment, without unrealistic expectations. This time, I was willing to move forward slowly, learning from past mistakes. Daniel also moved on, but in a different way. He continued to face financial and emotional difficulties. He tried to rebuild his career in another city, away from judgmental eyes. I learned from Ricardo that he had started attending support groups to deal with guilt and regret, trying to find purpose after losing everything. Despite all the suffering, Laura never wished him harm. I just wanted distance. And, although I had no intention of forgiving him, deep down I wanted him to find a way to redeem himself. On her loneliest days, Laura thought about the past and everything she had lost. But instead of feeling sad, he started to see that as a release. She was no longer a prisoner of a relationship that suffocated her or broken promises. She felt stronger, more in control of herself, as if she had finally rediscovered the woman she had left behind. The cell phone vibrated next to her, bringing Laura back to the present. It was a message from Marcos, asking if she wanted to have dinner that night. A smile escaped his lips. He responded quickly, accepting the invitation, and left the phone aside. As he got up to get ready, he looked at his reflection in the mirror and noticed something different. The once tired eyes now had a renewed shine. There were still scars, of course, but they no longer defined her. They were just marks of a history that remained in the past. Daniel, in turn, felt the weight of his decisions every day. Living in a modest apartment, he spent sleepless nights, rethinking every moment that led him to that point. He tried to redeem himself in many ways, with donations, volunteer work and apologies, but he knew that some wounds would never be completely healed. He discreetly followed Laura's social media, seeing her smile in photos and enjoy the new phase of life. He felt a mixture of happiness for her and regret for what he had destroyed. He knew he could never get back the love he lost, but he hoped that one day he could at least be remembered as someone who tried to change. Sophia, on the other hand, faced a darker fate. With the case still ongoing, she spent most of her time in prison, awaiting trial. She tried to claim that she had been manipulated by others, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The contemptuous looks in the courtroom showed that she would not be able to escape the consequences of her actions. The money that was not recovered remained a shadow for everyone involved, a reminder that some losses can never be made up for. For Laura, what mattered most was having found peace. He learned to allow himself to make mistakes, to forgive himself and, above all, to never again accept less than he deserved. And at that moment, as she prepared to leave with Marcos, she felt alive again. Daniel would continue his lonely journey, trying to rebuild himself from the ashes of what he destroyed. He knew that time would not erase his mistakes, but he was determined to move forward, even if the path was long and arduous. Sophia would ultimately pay the price for her excessive ambition, facing isolation and shame as inevitable consequences. And so, each of them followed a different path, carrying the marks of a past that could not be erased, but that also no longer defined them. Now that the story has come to an end, we want to know your opinion. What did you think of the ending? Comment below your impressions and share your reflections on the characters and their choices. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more content like this. Remember, this channel does not support any type of cheating. The stories told here show how wrong decisions can leave deep marks. Until next time.